Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining me today. It's Allan Laboucan with the Rocks and Stocks News Show, and we've got a new guest for the show in Rick Trotman from Barksdale Resources. Thank you very much for joining us today, Rick.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So recently I made, on February the 17th, I made Barksdale Resources a pick of mine in the Rocks and Stocks News Report. Because I think it has a very unique opportunity. Years ago, I followed Arizona mining in my reports when they were around a 50-cent or less stock, and they went on to make an important CRD discovery and a big one, and they were ultimately bought out by South 32 for 2 billion Canadian. And why that's relevant to the Barksdale Resources story is because Barksdale has the ground right beside the big Taylor deposit at the Hermosa project, and some historical drilling suggests that the CRD continues onto Barksdale's ground. So I'm really happy to have Rick on to tell us about the Barksdale story.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. It's great to be on here for the first time, and thanks for the warm welcome there. Yeah, we have a very exciting project, and as you mentioned, we're in a very fertile environment. So that large CRD that you were speaking of, the Taylor Hermosa system, we have a piece of it, and so our goal over the next, the rest of this year, quite honestly, is to get a drill rig on it and see exactly how big it can get on our side of the fence. So we know that the mineralization keeps on trucking across that property boundary. We have those historic holes that highlight some very thick, very high grade intercepts on our side of the fence. And so the million-dollar question, as it were, is, can we build big tons at big grades on our side of the fence that would be strategically important for the guys next door? And that's the crux of it.
You mentioned the word fence, and as I was doing my homework, I went through your corporate presentation, and you literally are on the other side of a fence from their mine workings. I think it's within a couple hundred meters of the claim boundary, and there's an actual fence there.
Oh yeah, we can stand on one side of the fence, and that's where we do our arm waving sessions when we bring folks to site. And I could literally have a conversation with, guys on the other side of the fence that are, well, I mean, there's a bit of a drop down because they've removed the side of a hill, but we're standing right there. We can see the two portals that they have going underground. We can see the water treatment plant, all that infrastructure. It's just right there. It's not this Nevada trendology where you're 50K along some imaginary line that's drawn in the desert sand that, you're right on strike. We're literally probably standing on, above a piece of the deposit, quite honestly.
Well, actually, and by the way, I'm a big proponent of investors doing their homework, and a great place to start that is to go to the barksdaleresources.com website. And on their corporate presentation, I'm just, first of all, you've got a couple of people that I'm familiar with, Andy Pooler and Terry-Ann Walecki. We worked together for a number of years, and Andy's a hell of a mine builder and operator, having worked for some big companies, and Terry-Ann is excellent at telling the story and getting things out there. So good to see you got some excellent people involved with you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Andy is he's leading the charge on our PEA on this copper gold system that we have down in Mexico. So he's got his hands busy right now with his sleeves rolled up. And Terry-Ann, she's integral to the whole operation. She chats to everybody and allows me to go and do my job, so to speak, which is fantastic.
That's important these days because I think it's in a world where the online is where a lot of investors in the space have to find their information, because in a lot of ways we've been sort of abandoned by the research analysts at brokerage houses and the media that used to cover things closely. So I think it's important to be getting the word out there online and doing it on a regular basis.
Yeah, exactly. And the other great thing is that if folks have questions, like direct questions they want answers to, they can feel free to just reach directly out to myself or Terry Ann, and we'll get you the answers that you need, because the due diligence process is the most important piece of this whole thing. People shouldn't be buying on a whim. They shouldn't be emotional. At the end of the day, they need to know that their hard-earned money is going towards a good investment, and that starts with research. So I was in private equity for a number of years, and we'd write basically books on what the risk looks like with each one of these investments, right? So all of our big shareholders go through the same process. So it would behoove people to do the same thing.
And in reality, I've been in this business for nearly 3 decades, Rick. And in my experience, it's those that do their homework and understand the companies they're invested in and have a reasonable time frame to allow those companies to, deliver on their promise or potential. And so I think that's crucially important, to do that homework. It's what makes up good investors in this space.
Oh yeah. Well, you would be surprised at how many times people have rang me up and said, I sold all my stock back when it went, down a little bit. I wish I hadn't, because now, XYZ. So you can't be emotional in this business. So
No.
at the end of the day, you're here to make money. All the investors are here to make money, and I'll give you my God's honest best to get there, but it's going to take some time.
You got it. So in my homework, I know one thing that stood out to me was your slide number 9. It shows in a color of gray the outline of the Taylor deposit and how it deposits don't care about claim boundaries. And it certainly looks like a good portion of that is coming onto your property. And also on that slide is that the Sunnyside porphyry, which is likely the heat engine for that CRD mineralization, is fully contained on your property.
Yeah, exactly. So that Sunnyside porphyry, if it was at surface, Allan, it would be great. It'd just be like many other Arizona porphyries, large, plus billion ton, kind of 0.3 style grades as far as copper is concerned. But it's not very shallow, and the topography, it doesn't lend itself for an open pit style operation. But like you mentioned, it's very important from the standpoint that it was the heat engine. So all of the heat and the convection cell set up by the emplacement of these rocks pushed out the fluids, the metal-bearing fluids that ultimately created this CRD deposit that you can see here in the gray. And this extends all the way to surface, several kilometers away. It's the world's largest CRD system, at least intact system, that I can name off the top of my head. And it doesn't include anything back from the property line to the porphyry itself. And mind you, this porphyry is defined by 6-7 holes. So it's loosely defined. And the area closest to the porphyry is going to see the most amount of fluid flow, the most amount of metal, because every drop of that fluid had to get pushed out to the very end of the deposit. So it all traveled through the same zones. So usually in these systems, you see increased continuity, you see better grades closest into the heat source, and you see a different set of metals very close to the porphyry itself. So you see higher copper, you see higher golds, and then that zones out into zincs and leads, and then ultimately, manganese and those lower temperature minerals out towards the periphery. And so you see that classic zoning profile in this system. And so we expect, this area basically between the property line and the porphyry, this is our best zone as far as a mix of depth and metal potential. This whole quarter of the property where we've permitted our exploration program, we think is highly prospective, but this deposit does plunge to the northwest and it dips to the northeast. So you will get increasing depth, as you go further to the north here, unless you get movement of the carbonate blocks that host this deposit. So yeah, this is kind of the sweet spot in there, Allan.
Okay, so you bring up a couple points there that I kind of want to make for the less geologist-minded amongst us, is that
Yep.
you need a heat engine to create the mineralization to make its way. Also very important is that when you get that wide distribution, it's indicative of a very powerful mineralizing system. And as you said, as you get closer to the heat engine, that's where you get elevated copper, gold, and then as you're moving to it, you also look for that zinc and lead and silver in a zonation of a CRD.
Yeah, exactly. And your viewers that are non-geologically inclined can think of it like a pot of rice on your stove, right? So you put the lid on that rice, you turn up the heat, and as that water warms up, it generates steam. And you can think of the same process when, magma is going into a column of rocks. It creates heat. It wants to push that water, the fluids out, right? And so just like on that pot of rice, the pressure builds and that steam wants to find an escape hatch, right? The lid starts dancing. All of that fluid wants to move somewhere else. And it's the same thing in rocks. And so what ends up happening is that those metals, those fluids move away from the porphyry. They take advantage of any porous zones, contacts between different rock units, any weakness that they can use to get out. And within this deposit, if I move a couple of slides up, there's basically, and I don't show it here just for simplicity's sake, but this red zone here, which represents the manto system, basically what you're seeing is the contact between carbonate rocks, which are at the bottom, and overriding volcanic rocks, which sit above. And those volcanic rocks act like that lid, and they don't like to let fluid through. And so that metal rich fluid kind of moves along the contact, and that's where it deposits the metal. That's where you see these big cherry zones of massive sulfide. And that's what we're targeting on our side of the fence, all the way back to the porphyry itself. And so you'll note that we have a couple of big hits from the 80s that are on our side of the fence here in these two holes. And then we had another hole that was too shallow. And then you come into the porphyry itself, which is this big blue blob. And so this is one of the areas that we're going to be working to expand to show how this comes back to the porphyry. And then up in the volcanics themselves, you get epithermal veins, breccia pipes, things that can break through that column. But the big CRD and the skarn will be pressed up against the porphyry itself, and then along those planes of weaknesses heading away from the porphyry.
So, and for people to understand what you're looking at here, this is kind of the slice of a cake where you're looking at the side, but there's still more of that cake as you go towards the north and to the south, actually, from this slice.
Exactly. So if I went back here, what we were looking at is effectively a slice, like Allan said, across this deposit. And that slice, or sorry, that area of potential wraps around the porphyry, all the way around the clock, so to speak. Now, we know that there are carbonates in this area, which we call the high priority area. And those carbonates are what hosts that carbonate replacement style mineralization. We don't know as much around the other side of the dial, so to speak. And so that is an area of, great potential for us. We will ultimately look to put some holes out there to probe to see what's going on the other side of the porphyry. But we know that this area in this lighter blue color is the high priority zone where we know that we can intercept this carbonate replacement style mineralization. The only question is how much, what's the quality, so on and so forth, right?
Right. And so that's a pretty darn big area to the north and over to the porphyry, and then you've got the rest around the porphyry. And I noticed some pretty nice copper grades in that on your side of the fence.
Yeah, exactly. Like we spoke about, getting in closer to that porphyry, we expect copper to go up. to give you an indication, South 32 has made a recent discovery just in here, if you can see where my cursor is moving.
Yep.
And they're calling it the Peak deposit, which is another skarn style deposit, but it's copper dominant. And they're putting out huge intercepts of, high grade copper style mineralization. And that comes again right to the property boundary. So whether Sunnyside is a single porphyry or there's a series of nested porphyries or even a second porphyry down here, this is a huge system. There's lots of metal in this district, not even, talking about the large, world-class deposit that we have here.
Now, about that porphyry, it is limited drilling. Do you think that there's any potential that you could have some high-grade shoots in there that could be selectively mined down the road?
Yeah, I wouldn't put it past from a geologic standpoint. Allan, there's a couple of porphyries in this district. So Sunnyside is here. There's another one that sits roughly half on our property, half on this little embayment right here called Ventura. It's another large porphyry that was drilled by Asarco back in the 70s and 80s. And then there's one to the north. It's just off the slide, probably up here above where you see the word properties. Okay. It's called Red Mountain. And Red Mountain has half a billion ton resource. Within that resource, there's a breccia pipe that's probably 50 million short tons of plus, 1.5% copper plus moly, silver, gold. And so I'm not sure if there'll be high grade shoots, so to speak, but there could very well be additional breccia pipes, in and around this Sunnyside porphyry area that could be, quite attractive from that standpoint.
So to the non-geo out there, that's where the rock gets broken up. And as Rick was talking about, you need that permeable rock sort of to work like a sponge, if you will, for that mineralization to get in there. So was there any evidence that there might be some brecciation in that porphyry in the limited drilling, Rick?
Not that we've seen, well, little zones, but mostly faulting. I don't think that we've seen any, proper breccia pipe style mineralization within the porphyry footprint right now. I would note that there are probably at least a dozen, if not more, breccia pipes that come to surface on this property, mostly concentrated in and around, this area. So there are lots and lots of breccia pipes. I bet you there's more than 50 in this district that come to surface. So our Four Metals project, which is just a couple of kilometers to the south, has a breccia pipe sticking up out of the hill called Red Hill for obvious purposes. And it's got some historic polygonal resources on it of, 50 million tons of, 0.5% copper. They're polygonal, which is it's a crude, old-fashioned way of putting together resources. It should be relied on, but it gives you a sense for what these things could be, right?
So getting back to the CRD, you need a heat engine. You need some cracks in the rock where that fluid can make its way up. You need mineralization. And it doesn't hurt that you have a big deposit as you move away from that that potential heat engine for the whole system. And so you've checked off all the boxes that you need there, Rick.
Yeah, so Peter McGaw, who's a big, he's probably the world-renowned expert in carbonate replacement deposits. He lives in Tucson, just to the north of here. He's got this checklist, and you can find this checklist online. We basically check every box on it. It doesn't hurt to have the world's largest carbonate replacement deposit sitting right next door. But at the end of the day, this is a huge system. It seems like it's long-lived. And really what we need to go out and understand better are the traps effectively. So think of it as like oil and gas exploration. You're looking for traps, places where the fluid gets stuck for a while and has time to drop the metal out. And where you find those traps, generally along through-going structures, those are the cherry zones. Those are the super high grade massive sulfide zones. You're not really interested in the other kind of larger, all-encompassing zones of mineralization that could be quite thin. You want those big, sweet cherry spots, so to speak. So that's what we're going to aim for. That's what we, are targeting right now, and that's where the first holes will go.
So I started this by saying you're in a unique opportunity. And what I meant by that is you currently have a $58 million valuation. And I would venture to say that if you were drilling today, investors were sitting right beside the big Taylor deposit that everybody knows about. You probably wouldn't have a $58 million valuation. So the reason for that is you guys have been working for some time now on getting permits to go after that target. And it's taken a while, but it looks like you're at the sort of the end of the road as far as getting those permits to drill.
Yeah, exactly. We're on the glide path, as I like to call it. So we've been in this permitting process for over 4 years. It's a complete bear. We're on U.S. Forest Service ground, so there's a lot of hoops that we have to jump through, a lot of work that has to get done, and we have to deal with government agencies, which is time consuming, in order to get in here and drill. The good thing is, we've got the draft permit approved. We are now in basically these compulsory kind of bureaucratic next steps, which have clocks associated with them. The rest of the permit that we went through for 4 years didn't have a clock associated with it. There are no statutory timeframes. The forest could take as long as they wanted. These ones do have defined timeframes. So, we should have drills on the ground here as soon as the process is buttoned up, and that's projected to be in either late May or late June, depending on whether the Forest Service exercises their 30-day extension on this objection period. So that's what we're looking at right now, and we'll keep investors up to date as we move through. There's a couple of different little periods here, so we'll keep investors up to date as we move through these going forward. And we're, in the meantime, building our team. We're going through with drilling contractors to get agreements in place. We're basically putting all of the infrastructure and logistical services in place to get on the ground and start drilling here.
As soon as you get those permits, which sounds like a couple, 2 to 4 months sort of window?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, late May, late June.
Perfect.
Somewhere in
And
there.
so how's the cash position? And I think I read that you have some important investors in your company as well, and I don't blame them.
Yeah, cash position is good. We have $6.5 million at the end of January. We had a series of warrants associated with a 2020 financing that were all in the money. The vast majority of them were exercised in late January before expiry, so that added another $4 million to the coffer. So we have plenty of funds on hand right now to basically get in here and start drilling, later on this year. We don't have to do a financing. We can be advantageous when we do our next financing, anytime between now and probably first results on the drilling program. Just depends on the quality of the sponsor and how that fits into kind of the corporate dynamic. We don't like to just bring in anyone, Allan, onto the register. We like to make sure that they're long-term investors that have the same investment thesis as us. Because if you don't jive on those things, then it's harder at the end of the day you need everyone rowing in the same direction, is basically what I'm trying to say. And like you mentioned, we have great investors behind us. There's roughly 70% of the stock that I can pick up the phone and talk to. Over probably 40 investors, with the top 5 owning a significant chunk of the company.
Well, you're in a unique position in where you're located, which gives you an options that maybe other juniors don't have, in that you can be selective on who you take money from.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, it's not easy. There's not like I'm out there crowning the winners, so to speak. We're just very patient, we're very diligent, and we've turned down investors before that it just doesn't fit. So it's not easy to raise money. Let me get that out and make it perfectly clear. So we try our best. We are big shareholders in the company and ultimately want to make sure that we make our investors money, because that means that we're most likely making money for ourselves. And that alignment is critical.
I once knew a pilot, and I flew with them, and I said, when you were flying, did you worry about all those people behind you? And he said, well, as long as I looked after myself, I knew that those people were safe. And I always I make that analogy when I know that there's good insider ownership, because they want to fly that plane and take care of themselves and everybody else. And it's always nice to have everybody lined up that way.
Yeah, I agree.
So Rick, I know we're getting kind of tight on time here. Did you have any closing comment you want to make?
Yeah, I would like to just close it off by saying, if you're looking for a new mining investment, go and take a look at Barksdale, do your homework. If it fits, fantastic. If you have questions, please make sure you reach out to either Terry Ann or myself. Our contact details are in the corporate presentation on the website. You can even sign up on the website to have a meeting directly with us. We'll get all your questions answered, and hopefully you choose to become an investor. And yeah, hopefully we'll be off to the races.
And hopefully we'll have lots to talk about in future interviews, Rick.
Amen.
I'm going to close it off and we can have a brief chat at the other end. So there you go, folks. Barksdale Resources, I started by saying, has a unique opportunity. It's not often that you have the potential to have half or around half of a world-class project that was bought out for $2 billion, and then you have a $58 million valuation. I believe that the only reason that you have that opportunity now is because they've been going through this prolonged permitting process. But as Rick was saying, now they've got a tight timeline on the process to get to that permit, which should be in the next few months. And they have the money to go at it in a hard way. And I think your window of opportunity at this bargain basement level will start to progressively, you'll lose that opportunity. I think they've got great things ahead of them. I think you, as Rick said, you should do your homework. As always, my shows are for information purposes only. It's important for you to do your homework, speak with your financial advisors. And I'm just like Rick, I'm a big proponent of that. Do your homework. It makes you for a more informed investor that looks at things logically with a reasonable time frame, and that enables you not to make emotional decisions and make logical decisions. And that's a recipe for success in any sector. On that note, have a great day, and we will talk to you soon.